Okay, today I'm going to be talking about my goals for 2021 as a reader. I know I'm a little late to the game, seeing as it is now, what is it, February 13th, 14th, I think. So I'm halfway through February. I know most people make these at the beginning of January, but I was a little late to the game. Nevertheless, I still wanted to go over and catalog my goals for 2021 to see at the end of the year how well I kind of achieved those or what have you. And most of these are obviously just going to be on kind of the directions I want to head as far as my reading is concerned and what the directions I want to take are. And a lot of these are going to just be building on my goals for that I had in 2020. 2020 wasn't the best reading year for me. I burned out about halfway through the year, and I didn't really do much reading after that. So one of my main focuses is going to be to just be a more consistent reader overall. I think that's going to be my primary goal for the year. Maybe not necessarily read more, but just read more consistently. Kind of make sure I'm picking up a book, every month at least, at the very least, and not burn myself out. And if you guys have been watching my other videos, you'll know this is kind of building on what I spoke about in my other video, which was Ramblings on Reading, which covered avoiding burnout. And I did that video mainly to remind myself, avoiding burnout is a very real struggle many of us have, and I am definitely one of the most guilty of that. So that's really my main goal, is just, be a more consistent reader, and make sure I'm enjoying it. And if I'm not enjoying it, being okay with, taking breaks and what have you, but trying to avoid the breaks that last months and months. So that's my main focus. And then just building on my goals of 2020, my other focuses are really just trying to diversify myself as a reader. And so I definitely know I love fantasy, and I've found the genre, and really that came about a few years ago. Well, about 6 or 7 years ago, when I came across Brandon Sanderson's Way of Kings. Before that, I always loved reading. I liked reading. I just was one of those people where I'd walk into a bookstore and I wouldn't know, kind of what direction to take. I certainly read good books before I kind of discovered the fantasy genre, or really not discovered it, but fell in love with the fantasy genre is another word. But after that point, from that point on, I've never been, my TBR has never been lacking, if you will. I've always had more books I've wanted to read than I feel like I can read, which I think is a very good problem to have, and I've spoke about it in other videos as well. But we're really spoiled right now in the fantasy genre with all of the subgenres that really have come to really have come alive, really what has felt like in the last 15 to 20 years, with kind of getting away from that Tolkien style high fantasy, which I love, don't get me wrong, and we do still very much have that in the genre, but just, authors being brave maybe is too strong of a word, but being bold in their decisions to branch out and use fantasy as a device, but not to kind of walk down paths that are well traveled upon already. So going along that's a long way to say that I just want to be more okay with and more active about exploring wider subgenres like urban fantasy, which I'm getting good exposure to in the Dresden Files, and then also one thing I really explored a lot in 2020 was the Grimdark subgenre. It was something I wasn't sure if I was gonna like or not, to be honest, because I love Sanderson, and he is very, very much not grimdark. But I was pleasantly surprised, and I think a lot recently too. These last few years, I've really come to know myself as a reader better, which I think is important to recognize and acknowledge. Where as before, I would kind of pick up a book and I'd finish it, and my biggest opinions would be like, wasn't that a good story? Yes. And more often than not, I'd be like, yeah, that was pretty good, and that was that. there's nothing wrong with that. Just reading sheerly for the sake of, did I enjoy myself? Was I entertained? I'm not taking away anything from that. That's still definitely my main goal when I am reading a book. Did it keep my attention? Did it keep me entertained? But also, now that I've become better read or more read, rather, I just, naturally have a little bit deeper opinions on books, and I know myself better as to what I like, and I think that's important, and that's kind of the main, the goal so far is, try and diversify myself as a reader, but really the ultimate goal in that is to discover, better discover what I like. Do I like horror more than high fantasy? Do I like Grimdark more than high fantasy? And right now I don't know. I'm happy. I'm happy with both those subgenres, or both those genres, but just exposing myself some more so I can learn better. Maybe what more to focus on, or discover new things, or what I might enjoy more than just what I had read. If you would ask me what I read mainly 4 or 5 years ago, it would have pretty much been all high fantasy. And as I've read more and more Grimdark and other things, I've really found a love for, and discovered myself as I'm more, of a character-focused reader than plot-driven. I'm only 2 books of the way through the First Law trilogy, but I think what that series has really done for me is really, and I read that a year and a half or so ago now, but that really made me recognize that it's like, oh, I don't necessarily need much plot in my book if the characters are written so well. And I'm sure you guys know, but Joe Abercrombie writes some of the best characters in the genre, and his use of Grimdark and then that setting, if you will, is just masterful, and something I absolutely love and adore. And kind of going along with that Grimdark, I picked up Lies of Lamora, which was the first in the Gentleman Bastard series, which I also loved. So it was definitely a success, I'd say, in 2020, kind of diversifying myself. In that I found I love great character work, and 2 or 3 years ago, I think I probably would have been able to weed that out, but I don't think I was actively choosing books that were known for having great characters. Whereas now that I know myself better as a reader, I know that is definitely something I'm interested in, so I'm going to continue to read books that have reviews that say, they do great work. And I think that's ultimately my one of my goals is in 2021 is just kind of, as I've said before, just discover myself really as down to my core, what I like and what I don't like. And I think that should ultimately be the aim, because we're all reading for pleasure, and if we can make more informed decisions by being better read in a wider variety of books or genres, I think that's important. So that's my big one for 2021. Just 1, staying more consistent is probably the biggest thing, but then 2, just continuing to explore kind of other subgenres. I think I know I'm not big into nonfiction, but maybe I'll try a book or 2 of nonfiction this year, just to kind of, maybe I do like nonfiction, and I'm just not sure. But I think so far as diversifying myself, I want to just focus on more the genres of all the subgenres fantasy has to offer. There's so many great subgenres out there. Grimdark is just one of them, and then the other one is just reading more horror, seeing if I like that. I know fantasy and horror can get lumped together, but they are 2 very different genres. Not very different, but they are definitely, they have enough differences where, I might not love horror, but I want to find that out. And I don't have a lot of horror under my belt, but the horror I do have, I've absolutely loved. The Shining, for me, which no one can argue is definitely a horror novel, is one of my favorite books of all time. And I just finished up The Stand and I really like that too. So going along with reading more horror, I definitely want to read more Stephen King. And so far, like I said, I just finished The Stand, so that's been going well so far. I am looking forward to read more King. I think I'm going to go more into The Dark Tower next, which I know is technically King's take on fantasy, but I'm sure there are horror elements in that too. And that's the other beautiful thing. There's a lot of crossovers between these genres. And then the other thing I'm kind of actively trying to read more is science fiction, which I started off this year reading Golden Sun, which was the second in Red Rising, and then reading this little novella that was absolutely great, All Systems Red. I think my review came across a little bit more negative than I wanted it to be. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It was a great, quick read that kept me entertained. So that's one of the other things. I'm just trying to read more science fiction and horror along with fantasy. I know I love fantasy, but I want to explore genres that I have less exposure to this year. So that has been going well so far. And I think too, as far as the sci-fi goes, I just started actually Morning Sun, which is the last of the Red Rising trilogy. So I'm excited to read or finish reading that series. And I know Pierce Brown has, I think it takes place in kind of the Red Rising universe, or might be a continuation, a sequel trilogy, if you will, that he is 2 books of the way through. I might hold off on reading that second trilogy until he completes the last book, just so I can once again explore other sci-fi. Another one of my goals for this year, going along, is kind of diversifying myself as a reader, just becoming better read. So I want to read more of the classics. Not classics as far as like Beowulf or the Iliad or Odyssey goes. Maybe that's for another year or further down the road. But just never read Lord of the Rings, which if you watched my review of those Juniper editions, I just picked those up. So that is definitely on my list that I'm going to be reading up. I would expect to read those in March, and I know it's almost sacrilegious or whatever to not have read, kind of the Godfather or the grandfather to all the fantasy genre. So I'm definitely excited to get those under my belt, and I have a feeling I'm going to love them, just because I do love high fantasy, and that's the quintessential high fantasy. But going along that same vein, I want to read more of kind of like the classics of the genre. Even horror, I want to read more, or not more, I want to read Lovecraft because I've never read him before. And I don't want my only exposure to a genre to be one author. And even though Stephen King is exceptional when it comes to horror, and I know it's kind of held as the gold standard, but I don't want my only exposure to a genre to just be one author. And I know Lovecraft, it's kind of all about separating the artist from the art. I know he's a little bit problematic, but still I want to expose myself to kind of the classics of the horror genre as well. And then as far as sci-fi goes, I have Dune. My brother got me a copy of that for Christmas. And that's once again considered a pillar of the sci-fi genre. So I'm definitely excited to read that and get my thoughts on it. I know it's a little bit, it can be divisive. Not everyone loves it. Certain people think it hasn't aged super well. But I'm excited to find out for myself. I'm not the toughest critic in the world, so I expect I'm going to like it, and just kind of once again really discover just another pillar of a genre in Dune. And along that same vein, I want to read Dune, and then on my I'm hoping to get to, I think I will get to this year, is also reading more, or reading Isaac Asimov, another one of the pillars of sci-fi, if you guys I'm sure know. And I'm going to start off with his Foundation trilogy, which seem, from what I can tell, I've seen a few copies in used bookstores that I haven't quite picked up yet. But they seem to be, they're not big tomes, they're not 900 pages long like so much of fantasy is. And that's kind of another area I want to explore. I love a good epic fantasy series, as I'm sure you guys know. But maybe just exposing myself more this year to shorter self-contained novels and see how much I like those. But I think I will always well, I have no doubt I will always love a good epic fantasy series. So just to wrap up, kind of do a little short recap, get everything nice and condensed. So 2021 for me is mainly about being a more consistent reader, not falling off a cliff as far as reading goes and burning myself out, taking a few months off or what have you. And then diversifying myself as a reader and becoming a better reader, I think, and just getting more into genres other than fantasy or subgenres that I'm not as familiar with in fantasy. And the main two genres I'm hoping to explore more this year are horror and sci-fi, and then also kind of continuing on my exploration of the Grimdark subgenre, and maybe just looking for taking a closer look at other fantasy subgenres as far as other than high fantasy, that is. So those are really my main goals for 2021. Let me know what your goals are for 2021 down below as a reader, or maybe not even as a reader, just what you're hoping to improve on this year. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks.